In T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the Noise Floor Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Doyle. We're going to raise the floor. Let's make some noise. On this podcast, our goal is to have interesting guests, including musicians, songwriters, audio recording, mixing, and mastering engineers, sound designers, and composers of film, television, and gaming soundtracks from all over the world. Warning, this broadcast may or may not contain adult language. You have been warned. Some restrictions may apply. Void where prohibited. Today, I'm really excited to have the guest that I have. I've known him for over 31 years. He's been a bit of a mentor as well as a friend, and a man whom I lovingly call Master Jack Endino.
Oh, goodness. I'm blushing, Tad. You can't see me blushing here, but, well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure indeed to be on your podcast here. And, go ahead. What do they say? What are those things they do online? The AMA, I think they call it Ask Me Anything.
Right.
Well, I guess have at it,
Well, I'm going to start with some things like bands you've been involved in, and I'm just going to talk like somebody who may not know about you, although I can't imagine anybody who is in audio or a musician who doesn't know who you are.
You'd be surprised.
Right.
I remember I'm not very mainstream in my approach, really, so I'm a little off the radar as far as the masses, you might say.
Right. I'm aware that you play bass, guitar, drums. You're a vocalist as well. You've shared some of those with records that I've worked with you on.
Yep.
And you just finished remastering the Tad reissues, which you did a great job, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk about the bands you've been in. Can you name just a few and what you did in them?
Well, right offhand, back in the 80s, I was in a band called Actual Size for about a year with some people who used to be in the Love family. That's a whole other story. I played in a band called The Ones as the bass player for Terry Lee Hale, who's a dear friend of mine. He lives in France now, and we played as a little strange sort of bluegrass punk power trio for a few years in the late 80s. That was a pretty fun time, kind of a left turn that nobody seems to know about anymore. And then around that time, Daniel House and I started Skin Yard. So I was playing guitar in that band. He was playing bass. We had drummers, all who went on to more famous bands after Skin Yard. I was drumming in a band called the Crypt Kicker 5 for about 5 years, which was kind of like, I would call it prog surf.
Right. I remember them.
Yeah, and then, and we did well. We were pretty popular in Seattle because it was the ultimate non-grunge band that you could possibly be in. And, and in the 90s, I kind of, after Skin Yard, hung it up in the beginning of 92 after 5 albums. I figured the world obviously wanted me to be a record producer more than it needed yet another guitar player. So I thought, well, let's see where this direction of my life is going to go, and I just decided to be a record producer engineer full time at that point, even though I'd pretty much been doing it full time previously anyway. But I figured, okay, the band is over, the touring is over, let's just see what happens. And I ended up going to about a dozen countries producing strange indie rock records in the 90s and just following wherever the work led me. So the 90s were an interesting time, sort of, while grunge kind of blew up and collapsed here in Seattle, and the alternative music and the indie rock world went through several different phases during the 90s. I was off pretty much not paying much attention to it. I was done with it here for a while. Guitar was kind of a dirty word here in the mid-90s for a little bit. It was kind of what I call the grunge hangover, the circus left town and everybody was just too bummed out, everybody got dropped or OD'd or killed themselves or,
right.
Went bankrupt, there's all these like sad stories when the whole grunge bubble popped. And I was just out of here. I said, well, screw this. I'm going to produce records in other countries. And, I got to go to all these great places and see all sorts of stuff. Punk rock, basically, enabled me to see the world, So that was pretty cool. The downside was all those records I made, none of them ever got released in the United States. They meant nothing here, so it's like I disappeared. But I had a great time. So my discography has a lot of, records that nobody here in the U.S. is ever going to hear. Some of those are my favorite records I've ever done, like in Brazil and things like that. But, whatever. I don't care.
Yeah, you have done a staggering amount of discs on your discography. And if you go to Endino.com, you can see a list of them, as well as a lot of the other awesome stuff that you have there.
Back when I had more time for the internet, and, I'm kind of burning out on it now. Everybody's like, the social network thing is really like, people were constantly writing me and asking me the same stuff, and I started piling all my answers over about a decade and made this huge FAQ on the site. And that's turned out to be a pretty good thing. It deflects a lot of the same old questions.
Right.
And so there's a lot of information there, and there's a lot of just ranting and polemics and chest beating and so forth about this and that. And I still haven't written my great rant about click tracks. That's been brewing in my mind for like 20 years, but I'll get to it.
I feel you on that. I've been hearing you talk about that.
Oh yeah, Eno just did a great thing actually that popped up. There's a video of him talking about it, and I was just like, yes. But nobody listens to Eno at this point, and nobody will listen to me about it either, because click tracks are all about convenience for the producer, and nothing to do with music.
Well, it's also a reflection of drummers with bad timing.
Well, the drummers with bad timing are more interesting to listen to when they're not playing to a click track.
Well, yeah, sometimes
they're either gonna play bad without a click track or with a click track. But let's not go down this rabbit hole right now, Ted.
Right. Okay.
It's not the time for it.
All right.
Oh my God! I think Barrett's book just came out. Barrett Martin has a book, and he just dropped it in my mailbox, and he got a quote from me in there, and I don't even remember writing it, but I said something along the lines of, music should not be pinned to a grid like so many dead butterflies. Something along that. I wrote that. What? I must have been thinking really clearly that day, So, and Daniel's working on a book too. So if I ever do a book, it'll be the third member of Skin Yard to do a book. But we'll see.
You mean Daniel House?
Yeah.
Yep. Daniel was one of the first guys who helped start the CZ record label with you and Chris Hanzik, correct?
Right. Chris started the label in order to release the Deep Six record and a Melvins EP. And he kind of, once he got busy with Reciprocal Recording, where I was like an engineer, he figured like it was a lot more likely to not lose money by concentrating on the studio rather than the record label. And he wasn't entirely wrong.
Right.
So Daniel and I, meanwhile, were getting ready to put out the first Skin Yard record, and we thought, hey, can we put out our record on your record label if you let us do all the work and pay for it? And he said, you know what? Here's the logo, here's the stationery, here's the business license. You guys can just have it. Do what you want with the record label. And so Daniel took it over and ran CZ Records for probably, a long time. A good 15 years at least. And I continued just being a record producer for the most part. I'm not cut out to run a record label. I would want to release all my friends' records, and I would just lose money, and that would be that. It's a sad thing because I always have to tell myself, look, I make the records, I don't sell them, I don't promote them, I don't press them, I just make the records. Someone else has to worry about that stuff, and it kills me. I make amazing records sometimes for bands that nobody's ever going to hear. And I just go, it's on to the next record.
Well, that's why we're here today doing this. Maybe this will get to some more people that'll run down that rabbit hole with us.
Yeah, I know. Like whatever happened to the Dirty Power record, And there's so many great records, and bands I worked with like Gashuffer, who were like my favorite underdog band in Seattle. It's like this is the most brilliant band that people are not hearing. And things like that. There's always something like that I go, damn, I wish more people heard this record.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, you've done a diverse amount of recording from people like High on Fire and Windhand you did recently. Is that correct?
Yep, correct. There's always a bit of, there's a slice of my production career that is basically like some kind of metal. It's funny because, you've got the first Lanigan record and stuff like that I've done, and Mike Johnson's first record. And I end up doing some acoustic things, some folk things, some jazzy things, some proggy things. And then, but I always have this, like, there's this little thread going through my discography. Of course, the grunge, but that was mostly the early stuff. But then there's always been a few metal bands here and there, and I really enjoy doing that stuff, under the right circumstances. High on Fire was one that was completely mission accomplished, in my opinion. I really had fun with that record. It was exactly the record that I and the band wanted to make at that time. It's called Death Is This Communion. That was a really enjoyable record to make. I think it was around 2007. So here's the thing. When I do a particular record that has a high profile, for a couple of years, I get other bands in the same vein who want to work with me for a few years. So around that time, 2007, I wound up working with Valiant Thor and Early Man and 3 Inches of Blood and Toxic Holocaust and Skeleton Witch. I'm forgetting a few others anyway, but I had a lot of fun doing this little streak of metal records, actually. And I still get one every now and then. And the most recent one was Windhand, and I think I'll probably be I think we're talking about maybe doing another record next year, so we'll see if that materializes. Depends on touring schedules and things like that. But they're really lovely people and a total pleasure to work with. And when I get somebody's music, I'm 100% on it, no matter what their style is.
For sure. That's what a good ear does, man, and you got that. So I got a question for you off base here. If you had to make a record with exclusively one microphone, one type of microphone, and it couldn't be an SM57 or 58, what would it be?
It'd be a Beta 58.
I heard that coming.
Yeah, of course you did. That's my Swiss Army mic right there. That's the desert island mic, actually. I guess if I wanted to, if I wanted to make everybody happy and not piss everybody off, I would have to say the classic AKG 414 ULS, because I'm sure I could make. If I had like a dozen of those, I'd make amazing records for the rest of my life. And I'm not
sure
that stoked on those for distorted electric guitar, but it would work, and it would work for absolutely anything else. So, but I have to say I like the Beta 58 for electric guitar, sometimes for snare, and frequently for punk rock screaming vocals. Yeah. Because you put a screamer in front of an expensive condenser mic, it sounds spitty and sibilant and just doesn't sit right in the mix. And that's just how it is, So you need a good dynamic, you need a good condenser. You don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on mics to make a good record.
Right.
It's all a matter of what mic you pick and where do you put it.
It's true.
And what you do with it afterwards, and whether your freaking original sound source is good. It's like tune the drums, buy the amp, make sure the tubes are good, put new strings on the guitar, get the damn thing in tune, use the right speaker cabinet. I mean, there's so many variables to get right. You can have the most expensive mic in the world, but if the source and the playing and the technique and the other conditions are not met, you could be making a really good recording of something that sounds terrible. And what's the point of that? So I tend to go to the source first, and after that it's easy.
Right. Well, speaking of which, along that line, we have a mutual friend, the Hippie Slayer, who made a record while being institutionalized with exclusively SM57s, and he's a great player. So, I mean, yeah. Have you heard that yet?
You know what? Believe it or not, I have some copies of some of it sitting around here that I got through a mutual friend some time ago, and I haven't actually listened to them yet. They're on the pile. But coincidentally, I'm going to have him in the studio tomorrow.
Oh man, give him a big hug for me. I love that guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you may have seen the picture that I posted, actually. He came up and hung out in the studio when I was working with Zeke, actually, a couple months ago. And, I hadn't seen Slayer Hippie since, believe it or not, SoundGarden opened for, what was his band? Help me out.
Poison Idea.
Thank you. Sorry, I had a senior moment. Yeah,
I have those.
Skinnyard opened for. Yeah, I know. Welcome to that. I had Skinnyard open for Poison Idea. I think it was like 86 or 87. That would have been 87.
Right.
Because I remember Scott McCullum was drumming for us. Yeah, we opened for Poison Idea at Natasha's in Bremerton. And it was the first time Skinnyard had a mosh pit, you know, because it was a total hardcore crowd. And we thought they were going to kill us, and they totally got into it. And we had a great show. And then Poison Idea came out and just slayed everybody. So he is the Slayer.
Man, they were at the top of their game.
They were raging, and the Slayer hippie was a pretty mighty drummer, and he still is no slouch. So, you know, so he's going to be doing a project with some friends of mine tomorrow in the studio. So he's actually going to be playing my drum kit that I used to use in the Crypt Kicker 5. So,
right on. Are you doing any more Earthworm records?
Yes, I have one on the back burner right now because, as a matter of fact, Earthworm, Endino's Earthworm. When Skinnyard folded, I let things lay fallow for a couple of years, and then I called up Barrett Martin, you know, who was the last drummer for Skinnyard. He was on the last 2 albums we made, and I called up my friend Rob Skinner from Coffin Break, and I said, "Hey, you guys, I want to do a solo record. Let's go in the studio." And I've got some songs, and let's do this, you know. So I wasn't sure if it would be a band, but I had a name for it. It would be Endino's Earthworm, and I was sort of thinking, you know, Tony McPhee's Groundhogs, Frampton's Camel. How can I come up with a stupid name that isn't likely to be, you know, in use? So I won't have to worry about, you know, a band in North Carolina using the same stupid name for a band,
right?
You know, that I've got, and that happens all the time when I record people, and you know. By the time the record comes out, they've had to change the name of the band because they found another one on the internet. Happens all the time. So I thought, okay, Endino's Earthworm, nobody's going to use a name that dumb. So we went in and we did some recording, I think in like 92 or 93. And you know, somehow, maybe it was before that. I don't know. The chronology is a little foggy. But that became my second solo record. The first one was Angle of Attack in 89. And I played most of the instruments myself on that, except for a little bit that Greg Gilmore played on the drums. But the second record was called Endino's Earthworm, and it came out in, I think, 93, something like that. And Barrett plays on that, and Rob Skinner does. And then we managed to do a few shows in the middle 90s. And then, you know, production got in the way. Barrett was busy with the Screaming Trees. You know, Rob was busy doing whatever he was doing, and it fell apart. And the concept of having a band of my own and calling it Endino's Earthworm, you know, I didn't revive it until one of my later bands, which was called Candy Coated. When that band fell apart after 3 very, very fun years around 2010, I called up my rhythm section from that band, which was Johnny and Sam, and I said, hey, you know, you guys want to play some of my songs now? And I'll be the singer and guitar player, and we can just have a little power trio. And that became the second incarnation of Endino's Earthworm. And we played around Seattle for a good 3 or 4 years, and we did pretty well. We had a couple different second guitar players in the band. One was Bubba Cree, known as, you know, his teenage band was called Void from DC. We're pretty amazing. He's a pretty great guitar player, and he was living in Seattle. So he played with us for a while, which was super cool. And then he had to go off touring with he went off on tour with somebody. I forget who it was. And we got Chris Johnson on guitar, who had been in Zeke for a while, and that was great. And then, anyway, long story short, the band fell apart about 3 years ago, but we're getting back together. So that'll be the first Endino's Earthworm show in 3 years. And it's forcing me to try and finish an unfinished Earthworm record that I really need to put out. So that'll be Jack Endino solo record number 4. You know, even though it's kind of a band thing.
I know you've had some people play with you on those records in the past. Are you doing most of the instrumentation yourself?
No, I pretty much have had to give up on drumming on my own. I just can't cut it on the drums anymore. So that's the main thing, is I always have to get somebody to drum for me. My last solo record, Permanent Fatal Error, which came out 10 years ago. I mean, I'm at about 1 record per decade as far as my solo records. I need to step it up a little. Ain't getting any younger. That's 3 solo records, 3 decades, and I'm into the 4th decade now, and I need to get another one out quick. But I had Barrett playing on the last one, and I had Josh Cinder playing on the last one. And Josh, for those who know, was the drummer for a very strong period in the history of The Accused. He's a mighty, mighty drummer, very, very good. And actually played in your band as well, I seem to recall. He was the last drummer in the Tad band.
One of the last drummers. He's a beast, and he.
Oh, he wasn't the last drummer. That's right. Mike Mongrain was the last drummer.
Yeah, Josh is a beast. He breaks brass, and drum skins cower in his presence.
Oh my goodness, he's one of the only people I know who can actually play double kick the way it's supposed to be played.
Yeah, and you tell a drummer, hey, you got to hit the drum harder because it sounds better when you hit it harder, especially for what we do.
Oh yeah, I've had that conversation.
You never have to tell him that.
No, you don't have to tell him that. Exactly. That's what I like about him. He doesn't. Yeah. He doesn't tickle the drums. You got to hit him.
That's right. Yep.
I had a band very briefly with Josh and with Alex Sebald from The Accused as my rhythm section in the late '90s. It was called the Suitcase Nukes, and we played exactly 2 shows as a power trio, and it was probably the loudest band I have ever been in.
That's a great name too, by the way. I always loved that name.
I know. I kind of wish the band had continued, but there were a lot of other things going on in my life and in theirs, and it was not to be. But we did record some stuff, and I ended up throwing it on my 3rd solo record. So that's the stuff. Josh and Alex are on that record on a few songs. Barrett's on some of it. Pat Peterson, the last bass player for Skinyard, he's on some of it. And then the rest of it, I think I played drums on some of it myself. So now at this point, if I make another record, I've got songs with Barrett on drums. I've got songs with Johnny on drums. I've got some stuff with Sam on bass. I mean, one way or another, I'll finish another solo record before the next decade is out.
Right.
I got records to make,
Yes, you do. You've been doing a lot of work in South America as of late, you intimated to me. What brought that on? Is it the things that you've done in the past, or is that just your popular area, or what's going on there?
Well, here's what happened. Imagine throwing a rock into a pond, and these waves, it sets up this ring of waves that go outward from the rock that you threw into the pond. And the waves go outward slowly, and then some of them, they hit obstacles, and maybe they reflect back to you a little bit. But anyway, the whole grunge explosion from Seattle went out with sort of a time delay where things come back to me sometimes years later, where people in some place thousands of miles away, all at once, they'll discover like all this music, and they'll be like, oh my God, whose name is on these records? This guy. Oh, they get on the internet, they find out I'm still, I get people who just sort of have just, younger generations who have discovered the whole Seattle thing as a part of what people do now, which is they go back through the whole history of rock, and eventually they hit upon the Seattle thing, and they go, oh, who's this record producer? And but to really explain it, I have to say in 1993, I got a phone call from somebody from Warner International, which is the umbrella organization that sort of supervises all the different versions of Warner music that exist in all the different countries around the world. There's a Warner Music in Brazil, and there's a Warner Music in, God knows, Japan. Any country you can think of has like an office from one of the 3 or 4 major labels. So, and the woman basically said, hey, there's this band in Brazil who are on Warner. They're on Warner Brazil, and they really want to talk to you about doing a record. And I had never thought about Brazil in my entire life. And the band was called Ticas, which in Portuguese means Titans, Os Titãs. And I ended up going to Brazil and making a record for them. And I ended up making 5 records for this band Titãs over the course of about 15 years. And I still work with the guy who used to play bass for them. His name is Nando Reis. And I made, I think, 3 or 4 records for Nando. He left the band about 10 years ago. And, other bands from Brazil have sent me stuff to mix. I do a lot of that these days. But so I got established in Brazil because all these records that I did went gold in Brazil. A couple of them even went platinum in Brazil. So, they treat me like Rick Rubin in Brazil, which is interesting. And I love Brazil. It's a great place to visit. It's a lovely time. The food is marvelous. The music is amazing. They have an incredible history there. You just learn about all this music. It kind of blows your mind.
They love their steak there, don't they?
Well, they have the churrascarias, actually. They love all kinds of meat, but they have like marvelous stuff. No, the people who really love their steak are the Argentines. Argentina has got the crazy beef. So Brazil led to, one thing and another. And meanwhile, I did a couple records in Mexico for a band called Guillotina. And then the Chilenos, as they call themselves, we call them Chileans. There was a scene in Chile that got a hold of me about 10 years ago. And this band called the Ganjas, who are I would call them shoegaze grunge. They're very cool, kind of psychedelic, kind of droney, lots of distortion, cool band. A lot of guitar. They got a hold of me and I did a record for them. And that led to one thing to another. And I think I'm on my fourth or fifth trip to Chile now. I really enjoy it. Whenever I go down there, I always do a couple of, some production. I do a little bit of, some indie stuff, a couple songs here and there. And I do a bunch of hiking and I walk around and I be a tourist and, maybe I get to, I've done some insane hikes in Chile that, are just so different from what you would do here in this area. So it's just an interesting place to go. Usually I end up speaking at a conference or something. And then I got a chance to go to Argentina and make a record a couple of years ago too. And that was pretty cool, because I went to Chile and then I took a side trip to Argentina to do a record and then came back to Chile. So South America has been pretty cool to me, I have to say. And boy, I don't know. That's that story. And you'll never hear any of those records up here.
Well, maybe. If you look for them, I guess you can find them, huh?
You could. It troubles me, and I'll tell you why. I go to these countries and I get totally immersed in their music scenes, okay? I hear all these bands. I come back with like a whole suitcase full of CDs of bands. And then, I might hear what, maybe what people write about and what people hear about up here as far as their music scenes in those countries. And it's stuff that, I just went to the country and I never even heard about any of these bands. So, it's strange, really. The stuff that people in the United States, journalists or DJs or whatever might pick out pretty much matches the music taste of the person doing the picking out, here at home. And you might hear something really cool and it'll be like, here's this great band from Chile. But if you go to Chile, nobody's ever heard of them. You go to a club show and it might be a completely different scene. So what you hear about Brazil, for instance, up here, everybody goes, oh yeah, Girl from Ipanema, and that's pretty much the start and the end of it when you ask people. It's either Sepultura or Samba. And, Brazil's like 250 million people or something. There's a giant music scene. You won't hear about any of it up here, none of it. And that's true of all these places that I visit. So it's always kind of blown my mind when I go to other countries and just am like, okay, play me some music. Tell me your history. Here's here's this cool psych band from the 60s that you had that I never heard of, the Complete Mutantes catalog. Cool, Papo's Blues from Argentina. Who knew about that? So, I've been exposed to so much cool stuff, by traveling that you just never find out about up here. I mean, you can find out about all of it on the internet, but the internet it's a huge sea with, every band is a little drop in a giant ocean. So I don't know. Anyway,
do you wind up playing on any of these records, or are you playing live shows at any of these places?
No, I never end up playing a live show, but I once in a while somebody like drafts me into doing a guitar solo. As far as I go. That has happened a few times, and I'm always real shy about it, you know what I mean? Because I'm like, oh, come on, I'm not appropriate for this, but somebody always grabs me at some point. Or, it's usually something like, oh, we need a slide guitar solo or something, and nobody can do it. And I'm like, wait, here, let me show you how to do it. And I'll tune the guitar to a chord and pull out a slide and be like, okay. And they'll be like, you play it. It's usually something like that,
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, you're just like, all right, I can do this. And then I'm all shy about it, but it is kind of, because it's hard. You're wearing the engineer hat. You're not wearing a musician hat. You're there to do their music, not yours. I mean, I got plenty of musical outlets.
Now, how does that work when you're recording your stuff? I assume you're the guy that's tracking your stuff. How do you keep that synergy going and move on with that?
It's really hard, Ted, as I'm sure you are aware yourself, because I have to tell a story here. I went to it was like the second or third K-pop conference back when those were a thing. And I was watching a panel discussion, and the name of the panel discussion, I think this was in Portland, the name of the panel discussion was the pros and cons of having a home studio or something along those lines. It was a home studio panel, basically, with a bunch of engineers and musicians who were known for having really good home studios and doing a lot of their own records there. And they had Jay Mascis on the panel. Mm-hmm. And someone in the audience posed the question. I think it wasn't the title of the panel, but this was the question, was, what's the downside of having your own home studio? And they went through the panelists, and everybody sort of gave their little spiel about, well, blah, 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 it's good, but then you don't know when to stop. And I remember they came to Jay, who was a man of very few words, as you know, and he basically said, years go by. And that was his entire answer to the question of what's the downside of having a home studio.
In true Jay form.
True Jay form, he kind of brought the house down because, he didn't need to say anything else. Just like if you've ever been there, yeah, tell me about it. It took me, 12 years to make my last solo record, and, I'm going on 10 right now for the next one.
Right.
So, yeah, that's the problem with having your own recording facilities. It's always easier to record other people who are, waving money at you and calling you and demanding you work with them right now. But your own thing always gets your own music kind of always gets put on the back burner because, you got to keep a roof over your head. And you also have to have enough time off to get other people's music out of your head.
Yeah, I remember you were so busy at one point that, I'd be texting back and forth with you, and it was just like you told me about all that was happening with you, and I was like, oh, my God, when do you have time to breathe?
I try and take August off every year if I can, because it's the only time the weather's good and I can get outside and not do music. But you know what always happens? Somebody books the show in one of my several bands, or some band that's touring and only has that window to record, you know what I mean? There's always some excuse. But sometimes I manage it. I managed to get half of August off this year, which was good. It's hard, I do what I like to do, and if I do a lot of it, then that's fine, It's hard to say I'm doing too much of it as long as I'm still enjoying myself. But, right now I just had somebody try and book some time with me, and I had to say, well, it's going to be January. And, we're speaking on September 1st right now, by the way. So, sometimes that's what happens. But, I'm not complaining. I really am not.
As an outsider looking in and a guy who's known you for all these years, I feel like you're very successful and you've done really well for yourself. I don't know how that shows up as far as monetary, but I don't equate money with success anyway. So, well,
to some extent, I don't either, Tad. I mean, remember, I'm still driving a 1994 Buick, and and I'm renting a house, but I'm extremely happy with what I'm doing. Things could have turned out much, much, much worse. I mean, when you consider I've been making a living, in the music industry, so to speak, for 30 plus years, and I still have all the work I can handle. It is strange that a lot of it is and remains largely under the radar kind of work, but I think that's where the real music is being made. I never really I don't have the temperament to I could have moved to LA in 1992 and cashed in, and been one of those really, I would have become one of those people that I hate.
Right.
Making records that I don't like. What do they say? Spending your time, impressing people that you don't like, and I don't know. There's a good little catchphrase.
That's hard work.
What it is.
Yeah.
I'm just I've turned down a lot of work with music that just repelled me, and working with people who were just obviously doing it not for the right reasons.
Right.
So, I remain an indie guy, and nobody's really making bank doing this these days. It's like you do it because you got to do it, and because it's satisfying. And you're kind of an artist too. You're helping other people make art. and at the same time, I have to have my own creative outlet, but it's all part of a big continuum, really. I just live and breathe music, and that's that.
Yep, I feel you on that. That's the way to be for guys like me.
It's a calling, Dad.
It is indeed. I remember the first time that I was introduced to you. I think you actually ran sound for my band, H-Hour, at the time when I was playing drums at a place called Scoundrel's Lair. And and I remember just being completely impressed with how you made a sound. I mean, it was just amazing. And I'd seen shows at that place before. It was an unfriendly sonic cave, shall we say. And
yes.
You made things sound really good. And so shortly after that, we were recording with you.
Yeah, that's right. You were playing drums in H-Hour, and I thought H-Hour was a pretty cool band, and you guys had some pretty good songs. I mean, there were no weak links in the band, really. You had a good singer. You were covering the drums more than adequately. You had an interesting bass player who was kind of like playing distorted bass, but using slap technique, which was kind of unusual in those days. The only other Seattle band doing that in the heavy rock vein was called Vexed.
Yep, Vexed. And, I loved Vexed.
And there was H-Hour. Yeah, Vexed was they were my roommates, actually, for a long time, or at least one of them was. And they always rehearsed in the basement right next to where Skinyard rehearsed. So I heard me a lot of Vexed. Another great lost Seattle band. But speaking of this, let's talk about old stuff. Because I have been called upon lately, strangely enough, to deal with a lot of ancient stuff that needed to be sort of revived and polished up. Like, one of them was remastering your first 3 records of your band, which was really a pleasure, actually. And since then, I've ended up supervising a soon-to-be-released UMEN Complete Works box set that Sub Pop's going to put out. And I supervised the remastering of that. I didn't actually do the mastering myself, but I definitely was calling the shots, shall we say. Also, I got to mix some things down that we found on their reels that had never been mixed. There were like 5 or 6 completed songs that they never bothered to mix down and release. So those are going on the UMEN box set. And then I got to remix Soundgarden's Ultra Mega OK, which was something that Kim Thile and I had been talking about for, 20, 30 years, something like that, since 1990. So that got released by Sub Pop this past March, actually, the deluxe reissue of Soundgarden's Ultra Mega OK album, which I didn't work on originally. It was not my record, but I had a chance to remix it and make it sound a little more like what we would have wanted a Soundgarden record to sound like.
Was that Andy Wallace, or?
No, it was Drew, actually, a guy named Drew Cagnolette, actually, who recorded them with his mobile truck, I think in Portland and maybe a couple other places. And I think they kind of did it in a hurry, you know what I mean? And Drew's a great engineer, but he's not a heavy rock kind of specialist. And so it sound-wise, aesthetically, the mixes were a little bit like not what you'd expect from a Soundgarden record. And I pretty much know what they sound like. God knows I've seen enough of their shows and opened for them enough times with Skinyard. And it was, Kim and I basically just taking our time with it, making sure it's right. I had that emailing copies to Chris and emailing it to Matt, and everybody was, very involved in it, even though it's from a distance, but everybody was super involved in the mixing as far as listening really carefully and offering suggestions, because they mixed it in a hurry. It was an indie rock record. They did it for SST. They probably mixed it, in a day or something like that, as one does.
Which you've done recently.
I have done. I just mixed an album in a day, 2 days ago, actually.
How many songs?
You know what? 8. So it wasn't
I assume it's not on tape.
No, it was all Pro Tools. And in fact, I am mixing in the box more and more these days. And I've become ridiculously fast mixing in the box. It's just crazy how fast I can work now. I mean, my hands are like a blur. The whole thing with Pro Tools is the shortcuts. It's all about the shortcuts.
Absolutely.
And once you can just fly through the program and just you spend so little time so much less time screwing around with stuff. You can spend a lot more time screwing around with stuff. That's the thing with digital recording, is you can go down the rabbit hole as far as you want to, but you can also treat it like a tape machine and just record to it and mix to it and not agonize over things. It's all how you use it, and don't let it use you. So
Right.
I find I can work extremely fast in the digital world when I am called upon to do so.
I'm not surprised.
You know, it's just starting to work for me, and more people are sending me stuff to mix where I never even meet the band. I might never even talk to them on the phone. It's all email. You know, they'll just say, "Hey, we just did a record. You know, it's a 6-song EP. You know, what would you charge to mix it?" And I'll say, "Well, send me a couple of songs first, and I'll make you an estimate." Because, you know, sessions come in all shapes and sizes. You know, I open a Pro Tools session and there's like 84 tracks or something like that. And, you know, as opposed to another one, which might be, you know, 15 channels.
Right.
You know, it's like, okay, wait a minute. These are not the same. You know, you can't charge people a flat fee for stuff like that.
Sure.
You know, but I usually try and I make someone an estimate. I say, send me your most complicated song and tell me how many songs it is and how many minutes of material it is total. And I'll pull some number out of my ass, and, you know, probably I can mix it for that, you know, and we just make a deal depending on what, you know, what it is and whether I like it, and, you know, if I feel like it's something I can work with.
Right.
So I never meet the bands, you know, so I have to do that. I have to do that in the box because I'm sending it over the internet. They may have changes for me to make, but they may come like 2 weeks later. It's no longer possible for me to set up a giant analog mixing board and you know, work with somebody thousands of miles away in real time.
Yeah, recall is awesome in the box.
Yeah, it is. You know, and I basically was a huge enemy of all the automated mixing systems that worked on giant physical consoles. I was their bitter enemy. I was a bitter enemy of console automation. I hated it. I never liked it. I never got used to it. It slowed me down to a crawl.
Well, it was kind of clunky.
Well, they were clunky. They were based on DOS programs, if not earlier. I mean, they were, you know, if I was using it every day, sure, I'd probably get pretty fast on it, because there's people who are really fast mixing on SSLs because that's all they've been doing.
Right.
But God bless them, that thing is a player piano at this point, as far as I'm concerned. It is antique. And, you know, once I had access to digital and was able to do all the recording and all the automation in the box with a mouse, that was like I'd been waiting my entire life to be able to do that, so I didn't have to deal with automated consoles anymore. And
that's good. I'm glad to hear that from you, because there's a lot of guys who fight that. Like, you know, they just don't think that, you know, it can't stand up to a console for automation and certainly for sound. You know, it's cool to hear you say that.
I'm no one, you know, the whole digital versus analog thing is a total red herring at this point. It's like anything, you got to learn how to use it. You got to learn how to get what you want out of it. It's just a skill. You know, you still are using your ears. Nobody can tell the difference. I'm mixing in the box now. I've been doing it for a few years, and nobody is going like, "Oh, your records are suddenly sounding completely different."
Right.
You know, they're not. I mean, there's something you get out of analog tape if you're recording at 15 IPS. It's kind of lo-fi. It's kind of classic rocky. It sounds very 1972. And that's fine. I still do that when people ask for it. But, you know, that's not how people are expecting to be able to work now. It's about the workflow. Everybody expects you to be able to go in and make one little change to your mix like a month later. And there's just no other practical way to do that at this point. I mean, I worked around it using stems for a really long time, and forget it. You know, once I started going to studios that didn't have a mixing board, that was pretty much it. You know, I had to sink or swim. So,
right.
You know, like I said, you know, back in the 90s when I first made a record on ADAT machines, which was that digital thing with the VHS cartridges,
mm-hmm.
you know, it was horrible at first, and then I learned how to do it, you know, and then, you know, suddenly it stopped sucking once I learned that, you know, you have to use your compressors a different way, you have to mic it differently, everything about it, you just change your techniques, to match the medium. And that continues. So, next. Here I go.
What's your favorite board that you've ever tracked on?
Favorite board that I've ever tracked on was a Neve VR. There was a VR and a V3, and I think Rockfield had one of each. I don't remember for sure. It was when I was recording at Rockfield. And I worked on these old Neve boards a couple of times. Now, I'm not a big fan of the ancient Neve boards. I like the later Neve boards, the really old Neve boards from like 1972. I've worked on those several times, and they're okay, but they have a sound, and I don't always like that sound. Mm-hmm. The slightly later Neves, I like their sound better, but there's not that many of them around. And, frankly, I'm pretty happy with the Trident that I work at here at Soundhouse most of the time. I personally recapped the board myself last year. And, now it's kind of about preamps anyway, because, I'm not mixing using the board very much. And I might not even be using the board's preamps for tracking, except for maybe a few things. Maybe if I've got a rack of API preamps, a couple of Neves, a bunch of APIs, some great rivers, some other things, I've got what I need, really. Because, as I got more confident in what I was doing, I could track everything flat, just straight through a preamp with no EQ and just worry about that later. So then it becomes, do you have the right mic? Do you have the right preamp? And the board is taken further and further out of the picture at that point, other than, an easy means to do a headphone mix for people while they're tracking. I do a lot of mixing and I do a lot of mastering. And in each case, I frequently don't even meet the musicians that are involved. It just comes in over the internet. And I have to go play a show tonight in one of the 6 bands that I seem to be in right now, which is kind of a record. I don't know how this happened, but I'm playing bass in one band and guitar in 5 others.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and I mean, they're not like regular full-time things, really. All of these bands are kind of like, a gig here, a gig there. But I wound up playing guitar in this version of the band Cries Mary. It's myself and Kevin Whitworth on guitar. Kurt Ekman, who used to be, I think he was in the Walkabouts. He's on bass, and Ben Ireland and Roderick Wolgamott, who are the original singer and drummer, I think, from the band. They're doing that, and so we're playing a show tonight, playing a bunch of new material that we just wrote. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm playing bass in a band called Upwell, who I've been playing with off and on for 15 years, actually. I think it's my 3rd stint as their bass player. And I've actually played in the band with, I think, 4 different drummers over the years. And, their bass players keep turning into a cloud of green gas, I guess, and I keep getting the phone call again. And they have to put up with my schedule, and that's the way it goes. Sometimes they don't see me for weeks at a time, but I always pull it together in time for a show. And that's fun because the guitar player in that band, Steve, he's a way better guitar player than I am, which, if I'm going to play bass in a band, it better be with somebody good. And then I play guitar in MKB Ultra with my girlfriend Mia and Mia Catherine Boyle, and that's a really cool band. We've had we've pretty much never had a bad show. That's been going for 2 or 3 years. Sometimes we have 2 drummers when we play, and that's another story I won't go into. The Earthworm is going to play a show at the beginning of October, so that's technically that band is back on. Let's see, boy. Oh, the Basement Sessions just did a crazy show about last week that was pretty damn funny, actually. That's a crazy project, and it's different people on stage every time we play, and that continues to be the case. First time Neil Rogers and I have ever been on stage side by side playing guitar, which was pretty fun. Neil, of course, was in a bunch of other bands that I recorded over the years. And then I have an improv band called Beyond Captain Orca. And it's a power trio with no songs and no vocals and no rehearsal.
Right.
And we have played 7 shows so far over the last 2 years, and all of them have been great. It's these guys, the bassist and drummer, Patrick Lennon, and 5-Track is the bass player. I know these guys so well now from playing with them that I know that they're very, very skillful improvisers. Basically, you can just point them in a direction and they just go. And I said to them, what if we tried to do this? People will think we have songs, even though we don't. Let's just get up on stage and play. And it's. I think it's probably more fun to listen to live and to play. I'm not sure how well it stands up as a recording. It's the jury's out for me, because improv is kind of like that. It's fun to do. It's not that much fun to listen to later when you're not actually in the room watching it.
Right.
But that's neither here nor there. We've recorded every show and put all of them up on Bandcamp. But we have a show coming up, actually. It's some sort of thing called Krautrock Fest.
Uh-oh.
Because we get mistaken for a Krautrock band, actually. I think Chris from Kinski compared us to Ashra Temple, and we were like, really? Okay. Fine.
Right.
So there's that, and that's a great band because it requires, it's low overhead and doesn't require a lot of time. You just basically book a show, you show up, you play, you go home, and you wait for the next show to happen. And it's like my ideal band in some ways.
That's good stuff.
I just always have something keeping me busy, is what it amounts to. And today I've got to actually go and mix a song for Chris Novoselic's new band, which is called Giants in the Trees, is the name of the band. And I've been slowly working on their record that they've been recording themselves out at the farm where Chris lives. They have a little setup in this living room that's, all full recording setup with drums and everything. It's where they rehearse, but they also have it all mic'd. And they've been slowly chipping away at recording an album themselves, and I've been kind of mentoring them along. Okay, here, mic the drums this way. Make sure you don't overload this, and and so they've been slowly crafting this album, and I've been mixing it like a song at a time. And I actually have to mix a song today before I go off and play my show. So that's ongoing. That'll be done pretty soon. It's a pretty cool album.
Very good. Now, along those lines of mixing, if you had to mix a record with only one plug-in, what would it be?
One plug-in?
Yep.
Wow, it would have to be, the Digirac EQ3.
Really?
That would have to be it, because I would need an EQ. I could live without a compressor, but I would have to have an EQ.
Right.
That would be the bare minimum plug-in, that's present on every Pro Tools system. And there it would be. I mean, with only one plug-in, great, what would you do? You'd have to have an EQ.
Right.
Really, if I had like the EQ and the compressor, those two plugins, I would have the absolute bare minimum to do pretty much anything. It wouldn't be amazing, but it would work.
Right. Well, good.
I'm not a plug-in snob, I like McDSP stuff. I'm a big fan of McDSP anything. I love their EQs. I love their compressor bank, their tape simulator. I like all that stuff. McDSP makes some great stuff. I got to give those guys a shout out here.
Do you have an endorsement with them?
I should have an endorsement with them. It's well, I'm endorsing them. Let's put it that way.
But are they endorsing you, my friend?
I'm endorsing them right now. I don't have a deal with them, but I'm going to endorse them as of right now. I just like their stuff. But if I'm confronted with a system somewhere that doesn't have any custom plugins, it's just the stock DigiDesign stuff, I can do it.
Colin, if you're listening, here's your man.
He's already been nice to me, actually. Years ago, he used some graphs from my website in his tape simulator plugin. This was like a long time ago, because I have a page on my website where I basically took frequency response curves for all these analog tape machines back when I was working on analog tape machines every day. And I thought, why do these machines all sound different? You've seen it probably.
I have, and I've read it and studied it, and
It's all like, and the thing is, all of these tape simulator plugins are using that kind of data exactly. And I remember he actually gave me a free copy of that plugin many years ago, because he asked to use my graphs from my website actually as part of the manual, I think. I don't think that's true anymore. My graphs are pretty low res by modern standards. So
they get the job done, though.
They get the job done, exactly. So, but I deal with whatever I have. I get a little impatient when I get a session from somebody that's got like 15 different bizarre plugins that I've never heard of, that I open the session up on my computer and they're all grayed out. It's like, well, just tell me what the settings were, you know what I mean? What was this delay setting? A delay is simple. You just tell me the delay time and the percentage of repeats and whether there was a roll-off, and I can duplicate it with something else. It's the same way with reverbs. I'll use the stupid Deverb plugin in Digital.
Deverb is awesome. Very underrated.
It's fine. I mean, my productions are not hinging on reverb for the most part. I usually have room mics, so, I just need something that'll work. And it's like anything. This is an interesting experiment. Here's something you can do that's kind of fun. Set up your favorite analog compressor, say an 1176 or some old tube thing or an LA2 or whatever, and parallel it into your board. Set up a session where you've got the same signal on two different channels, and run one of them through your favorite compressor plugin, and run the other one through, say, a hardware 1176 or a hardware LA2 or a hardware Symmetrics compressor, whatever you like. And facelift one and play around with the settings of the plugin until they cancel, and at that point you will have matched the plugin to what the hardware compressor is doing, and you can basically save the setting at that point on the plugin and go, here's my 1176 setting. I've done that. I've actually sat down. I mean, the studio is like a little laboratory if you treat it that way. You can run experiments and you can collect data. And it's kind of fun to take a plugin like a reverb plugin and set it up and, compare it to your Lexicon PCM70 and run like a single snare hit through various different plugins and find a setting that matches your favorite hardware, reverb, and save it as a preset.
Right.
And, go on from there. I mean, I did that years ago with my PCM60, which was like my favorite reverb unit for a long time. I found which settings matched it, and I saved those. I mean, you can do that with anything if you have it available to you. So, and I did the same thing long ago when I was first learning about using digital EQ, is I set up a mix on the board using the EQs on the board, and then I was mixing out of Pro Tools, but I was mixing through the board, and I set up EQ plugins on all the channels in Pro Tools, left them off, got my mix the way I wanted it to sound on the board using the onboard EQ. I think I was using the Trident. Actually, I did this with an SSL as well. And then I turned off all the EQs on the board, and I activated all the EQs in plugins, and I went through channel by channel, matching them, A-Bing them back and forth until I had what I thought was exactly the same EQ in the program versus what had been in the hardware for each channel, listening to the kick with the board EQ and with the plug-in EQ and just going through it all. And at the end of it, I had the mix pretty goddamn identical, using the plugins and versus on the board. I think I actually did this in Brazil using an SSL. I spent a whole day convincing myself that I didn't need to use the EQs on the board. All I needed was the McDSP EQs in Pro Tools, and I could match everything. And you know what? Ultimately, it actually sounded better with the plugins than it did going through the board. And that basically, at that point, that was like the watershed moment for me when my eyes were open.
And you were convinced. Awesome.
I said, all right. And I actually did that record in Brazil, mixing through an SSL board with all the automation off and all the EQs and compressors on the board off. I just used this giant SSL board as a huge summing bus. And that was the moment. From that moment on, I had lost my fear of mixing in the box. It was just a matter of time to dispose of the summing bus entirely and just do it in the box. It took me another 10 years to become confident with that.
Very cool. Very cool. I know you're a very busy man and you got a lot to do today.
I do.
And I'm so grateful that you took time out to talk to the Noise Floor podcast and be a part of this. It's an honor to have you on.
It's a pleasure, Tad. I hope you can edit it down into something that someone would actually have time to listen to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Take the best bits.
Perfect.
How's that? Is that good?
We have made the decision not to have any advertisers because we want to remain independent and fully self-supporting. If you would like to contribute to the well-being of this podcast, go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Tad Doyle. As always, we welcome your support. Subscribe to our Instagram and Twitter at noisefloor_. Also, visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Which Ape Studio. Go to our website, taddoyle.com, for more information. Thanks for listening and spread the word.